Hey guys, in this video I'm going to share 5 tips for how to really learn your synthesizer. So this can apply to you if you just got a brand new synth, or if you've had a synth for a long time but you never really took the time to really get to know it. So these are some things that worked for me, so your mileage may vary, but let's get right into it. All right, tip number 1 is probably the most obvious, but read the flippin' manual. So we've all been there, right? You get home, you have a brand new synth, the box is there, you pull out the synth, chuck the manual in the trash, and just start noodling away. Well, that's a lot of fun. After a while, it's probably going to get old and you're probably going to want to read the manual. So some tips there are treat the manual like a novel, right? So take it to bed with you, read a couple pages in the morning while you're eating breakfast, and just kind of absorb things that way. Another tip is while you're waiting for your synth to arrive, maybe you've placed your order online, this is a good time to download the manual online and start reading ahead of time. And the manual is useful not just for learning how the knobs work and the technical side. A lot of these manuals include really interesting tips for sound design and synthesis. I've learned a lot of tips and tricks from random manuals and things you wouldn't expect or think of doing yourself. So remove your ego hat, read the manual. You're going to thank me later. And the cool thing about manuals is that they're all free and available online as PDFs. So you can actually read manuals from other synthesizers. And I'm going to do a separate video about tips and tricks for learning synthesis and stuff like that. But that's another cool tip for you. So if you got bored of your manual, check out some other synth manual. All right, tip number 2 is take your synth outside of your studio. So for me, I find that when I first get a piece of gear, I like to sit down in my living room, just plug in headphones away from the studio monitors, from the DAW, from my laptop, from my other gear. Just you, the synth, in a comfortable environment, plug in headphones, and then just noodle away with the manual beside you. This is a great way to learn the synth outside of the context of music making and without being distracted with other gear or without feeling like you need to make music or anything like that. Your whole purpose there is just to have fun and learn and experiment with the synth. Tip number 3 is separate patch making time from music making time. So this is really important because you don't want to be in the middle of a song where all your creative juices are flowing and then you want to make a patch on your synth and you're having to pull out the manual and learn how to do basic things. So it's important to kind of split that side of your brain, but also split it in terms of time. And one way to do this is just allocate a specific day or hour or week or whatever you want to patch making. So for example, you can say, all right, on Monday, all I'm going to do is learn how to make a synth and learn how to make presets on it. And then on the other days, you can make music using those presets. But separating those two helps you keep the creative juices flowing while you're making music. And it also keeps your technical mind open while you're creating patches and learning your synth. So really important thing to do and something I found really valuable for myself as well. All right, tip number 4 is make your own presets. And this is kind of related to what I was saying in number 3 is take the time to program your own sounds. A lot of synths that have preset functionality have this initialize mode, which effectively kind of resets everything to basic sawtooth open filter. And this is a great starting point for you to start sculpting your own sounds. This is great because it teaches you about synthesis, but it also teaches you how to use that particular synth. And one exercise I like to do is practice initializing the patch by hand and then reconstructing a patch and going back and forth. So for example, practice resetting all the parameters using the knobs and then create a simple bass patch and then reinitialize it and then create a simple bass patch. This will teach you over time to really be intuitive with the synth without having to reference manuals or having to read labels. After some time, you really start to reach for knobs kind of by second nature. And this is also important because if you're in a creative process and you're playing a sound, for example, or performing live or anything, you can over time learn to hear a specific tweak or sound and quickly reach for that kind of subconsciously, which is really powerful because then your mind can focus on the actual melody and expressiveness without having to think, oh, where was that knob again? Or what was that thing called? Or what does the resonance mean on a filter, etc. So yeah, super important. Initialize your patches and make your own presets. And related to that, another cool thing you can do is explore and reverse engineer the presets that came with it that you really like. So as you're browsing things, if you hear a patch that you really like or that piques your interest, what's cool about presets is that effectively they just set settings for you, but all those settings are available for you to visualize and see, at least on most synthesizers. So what you can do there is once you find your patch, go through every section, look at the oscillator section, really look at all the parameters and think about why it sounds the way it does. And as you're going through it, try to tweak one parameter at a time. So for example, if you really like a preset, go to the filter and try to change the filter type or try to move the cutoff frequency and the resonance one by one just to get a sense for how each parameter affects the sound. And again, this applies both for teaching you how to make sounds in general, but also teaching you the sweet spots of the particular synth you have, because every synth has a different range, different feeling of knobs. And the more you practice and get used to the range of things, the more you'll be familiar with how to use the synth. And learning from the professional made presets is a great way to start. All right, tip number 5 is one of my favorites, and it's more of a challenge than a tip, I guess, but it's take the synth you have and try to make an entire track using only that synth, or an entire album if you want to. This is a great way to really get you to learn both synthesis and how to use that particular synth, because you'll be forced to create the kick drum, the snare drum, the hi-hat, everything from scratch. You'll be forced to create a bass sound, a lead sound, a pad sound, any sound you want. You'll have to extract it from that synth and not rely on any other synths or presets. Of course, you can use effects and other things, but the main point is that it'll force you to really explore all the different avenues and types of sounds your synth can make. And really try to push yourself here, because sometimes you feel like the synth is too limited and you might be wondering, oh, there's no way I can create this sound on this synth. But don't stop there. Really try to take things to the extreme. Even if your thing doesn't have a noise source, sometimes you can use creative ways to self-modulate oscillators to create the effect of noise. And that's just a small example, but there's always a way and a small workaround for something, even in the most limited synths. And I would say especially in the most limited synths, because that's the ones that require the most creativity. And if you can make a very basic, simple synth sound great and create a whole track with it, then imagine what you can do when you have those fancy big synths later on. So yeah, this is a great tip both for learning synthesis, for learning how to make tracks better, and for learning that particular synth. So definitely I challenge you to do it, and I'm going to hold myself accountable too. I'm definitely going to try to make more videos where I'm going to challenge myself to make tracks or even whole albums using just one piece of gear. Super fun little challenge. Let me know if you do it. Let me know in the comments and post your tracks. Love to hear it. All right, those are my 5 tips. I have one bonus 6th tip for you, and that's just to have fun and don't be afraid to experiment. It's easy to get caught up in the technical sides of the synth, and it's easy to be afraid of a synthesizer, especially if you're new to it. But don't be afraid to take things to the extremes and kind of embrace your childlike mind. Take things to the extreme, move knobs, patch things that shouldn't be patched. If somebody tells you don't do something, try it anyways. If people say, oh, usually you want to do this with that, do the opposite. You're going to have to try really hard to actually damage the synthesizer, and don't quote me on that. But effectively, you should be kind of free to experiment, because if you think about it, a lot of the sounds that are new and groundbreaking usually probably came about with slight tweaks or accidents, because if you were able to picture the sound in your head, then it wasn't original to begin with, and which seems to imply that the sounds that are original that you couldn't have thought of or heard in the first place have to come from accidental twists and turns. Not to say that you shouldn't understand what you're doing. Don't just go randomly turning knobs without knowing what's happening. Learn the basics first, get the basics out of the way. And then once you have that down, don't be afraid to patch weird things that shouldn't be patched. Nobody's going to hear you. You don't have to record anything. Nobody's judging you, even if it sounds crazy or if it blows your speaker. I mean, I guess that matters if it's an expensive speaker, but generally speaking, it's going to be really hard for you to actually damage anything. So definitely go crazy there. This is a great way to both learn the limits of your particular synthesizer, but also the limits of synthesis. And as you're learning all these little things, what to do and what not to do, eventually it all starts to accumulate in your head. And then when you're making other patches, you can quickly recall, oh yeah, I remember trying patching that. That's how I got that weird sound that sounds like a cat dying or whatever. That was a weird example, but you know what I mean. So yeah, don't be afraid to go crazy, experiment, and have fun. All right, that wraps up my 5+1 bonus tip on how to really learn your piece of gear. Again, this is useful if you've just got a new synth, or if you've had a synth for a while and maybe all you've done is browse presets and you never really got to learn it. There's so much there that you can explore, and you can kind of revitalize your synth by really reading the manual, getting to know it, start experimenting, and treat it like a normal instrument, right? So on every other instrument, we spend time practicing every single day, and treat synthesizers the same way, not just practicing musical scales and stuff, but practice synthesis. So maybe every morning, try to make a bass patch on all the synths that you own. Try to make a kick drum on all the synths that you own, and just kind of rinse and repeat, and try initializing your patch and then make a kick drum, and then reinitialize and then remake the kick drum to a point where you become really fast at it. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can fully utilize and kind of extract the most out of even the most basic synths. And if you want to get inspired, I encourage you to check out Jexus. I believe that's how it's pronounced. He's this synth YouTuber. I don't think he's making videos anymore, or maybe he is. But he's effectively known as kind of a legendary synth programmer. He doesn't do tutorials as much. It's more just examples of his patches, but the sounds he gets out of synths that normally people thought of sounding a certain way are just mind-blowing, and it really makes you realize how powerful synthesizers are, even the ones that we dismiss and we think as toys or we make fun of. In the right hands, they can really create something magical. All right, hopefully this was informative. If you guys have your own tips for how to learn stuff, let me know in the comments below and we can all share and learn together. And I'll see you guys in the next one.